Dr. Elizabeth Klodas is our guest this week. She's a cardiologist who trained at Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins and practices in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She's the author of the book, Slay the Giant, The Power of Prevention and Defeating Heart Disease, and founder of Step One Foods, a company dedicated to helping patients minimize their dependence on medications through strategic dietary change. Dr. Klodas, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Chris, it's great to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your time. And I want to thank my wife for finding the article that connected us. So I have to give her a little shout out before we start. I'm always fascinated by the professions that people choose and why they choose them. And you really have two professions. You're a cardiologist and food as medicine innovator and entrepreneur. Let's start with the first one. What drew you to specialize in cardiology and kept you motivated to go through the years and years of training to get where you are?
Yeah, I was fascinated with everything in medical school, but it's hard to ignore the heart. It is a miraculous organ. I mean, it beats 60 times a minute, 60 minutes an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 100 years. It just keeps going and going and going. It's incredible. And heart disease is also the #1 killer of Americans. And honestly, I thought the cardiovascular system was fascinating. I thought I could, make a dent in heart disease. I went into it to help cure the #1 killer of Americans. But what I found as I was in practice was that what I was treating was actually the wrong thing. I was treating high cholesterol and high blood pressure and high blood sugar and coronary disease and so forth. But if you peel it all back, the root cause of that is poor nutrition. And that's when I got really fascinated with food and with using food as part of the treatment plan and certainly the prevention plan for cardiovascular disease. And that's what ultimately led me to start a food company. So here I am. I never would have, in a million years, predicted in medical school that one day I would start a food company, but that's what I ended up doing. And I love it.
Here you are.
You
mentioned a few times that heart disease is the #1 killer in America. How many people die of that each year? And is that trend line pointed up or down? And what are the reasons?
Yeah, so heart disease is, like I said, the #1 killer. It doesn't discriminate between men and women. It kills more men than all other causes of death. It kills more women than all other causes of death. Actually, specifically, this is important to mention. Women are very focused on breast cancer and cancer deaths, and this is not to minimize breast cancer or cancer in any way. Cancer is a terrible disease. But just to put things in perspective, 1 out of 30 women will die of breast cancer. Horrible. 1 out of 3 will die of heart disease. So heart disease is our disease. It's disease of women. If you look at the latest statistics, and they go back to 2019, even though they were announced in 2022, about 875,000 deaths from cardiovascular disease in the United States alone per year. And that's basically translates to, someone having a heart attack every 40 seconds, someone having a fatal stroke every 3.5 minutes in our country. So it's a devastating, highly prevalent disease. And in terms of the latter part of your question, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? For a while, it was getting better. Statins, cholesterol-lowering medications, all these medications that have been developed, the procedures, were really helping people live longer. The problem is we've in many ways outstripped what those medications can do. Our lifestyle factors have deteriorated further. Obesity rates are exploding, diabetes rates are exploding. And really we've kind of reached a tipping point where the gains we've made, we're starting to unwind. And I think it's going to be especially a big problem as we emerge from COVID. During COVID, a lot of preventive care, a lot of routine medical care was set aside, right? People were afraid to go to the doctors. We weren't encouraging people to seek out non-essential, non-emergency care. And I think this is, and I'm already seeing this in my practice, people coming back with worse risk factors, worse, poorly managed. And that's just down the road going to translate to higher rates of cardiovascular disease and death.
Well, and speaking about, obesity and COVID, do you feel that COVID increased the obesity rate because people were, to your point, were locked in, they weren't seeking treatment?
Yeah, and the things we were doing that help curb obesity, for example, going to the gym, right? That went away. No one was going out to exercise. No one was, was engaging in those regular activities. We were more sedentary. We were at home, and we were eating comfort foods. Because it's what we love, and it was a scary time, and it's all very understandable. But it took us backwards in terms of our health.
It's interesting. I'm so thrilled you're here today because we've had a lot of conversations around mental health on this show. And in particular, as we come out the other side of COVID, we clearly need to have more conversations around physical health, and particularly heart health. To that point, we had the comfort foods for 2+ years, didn't care. We wore our sweats to our Zoom calls and nobody could see anything. And the elastic waistbands were our best friends. And so I appreciate you raising that point because now that can give us, a new direction to focus here on.
Yeah.
When it comes to heart disease, there's obviously so much to talk about, but the issue for millions of people is their cholesterol.
Mm-hmm.
What are LDL and HDL, and how does each affect our health?
So when we get a cholesterol profile, we typically get 4 numbers. We get the total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, and triglycerides. Most people remember their total cholesterol because it's just one number, but actually that value is probably the least important of the 4 because the total is made up of good cholesterol, which is HDL, bad cholesterol, LDL, and triglycerides. And you can have various combinations of those and get to the same total number, but with very different health implications. So HDL, good cholesterol. It's if you want to remember which is which, H, happy, you want to keep it high. This is the cholesterol that's not depositing in our arteries. It's on its way out. So you actually want this number as high as possible. In men, we like to see it over 40. In women, we like to see it over 50. In general, the higher the better, although at some point the protective effect of this kind of wears off. When you get close to 100, and very few people are at those levels, but when you get to those levels, it sort of levels off in terms of how much additional protection it provides. LDL, lousy, you want to keep it low. This is the cholesterol that's potentially depositing in our arteries. So a lot of focus is on LDL because this is the cholesterol we're trying to lower through nutrition, through medications, et cetera. In most cardiologists would say, boy, everybody should be under 130 for LDL. As you accumulate risk factors, and that might be a history of smoking, you have high blood pressure, a strong family history of heart disease, closer to 100 would be ideal. Once you have documented coronary or vascular disease, or you're a diabetic, because diabetics are at very high risk of developing heart issues. So you've had a stroke, heart attack, bypass surgery, stent, or like I said, you're diabetic, LDL should be under 70. And there's even data to suggest that under 50 is additionally protective. So the main message about LDL is the lower, the better. Triglycerides are the last component of the cholesterol profile, and they're actually not much of a cholesterol particle. They're mostly fat, which is why you can't add up the 3 numbers to get the total. The formula is LDL, bad cholesterol, plus HDL, good cholesterol, plus 1/5 of the triglycerides get you to the total. Normal triglyceride levels are under 150. The only one thing I'll say about triglycerides that's important to keep in mind is that they're a different animal. They live on a different scale. The lowest I've ever seen is 27. This is someone on no medications, but the highest I've seen is, well over 2,000. So it's a ginormous scale. And everyone's supposed to be clustered under 150, but absolute changes in triglycerides are often more of a shoulder shrug than, even though they might look impressive in absolute numbers. But everyone should be under 150.
And do we get most or all of our cholesterol from the food we eat, or does our body produce it in some other way?
So let's focus on LDL because that is the most important particle of the cholesterol profile in terms of risk. So for LDL, we either make too much internally, we get rid of too little, or we don't use enough. And actually cholesterol from food is a minor component. There are other much more powerful factors at play. Okay, we make too much. There's an enzyme in the liver called HMG-CoA reductase. It's not important to remember the name, other than that's the enzyme that statins work on. HMG-CoA reductase drives LDL production. And it's influenced by many factors, including insulin levels, exercise levels, our weight, how much sugar we eat, et cetera. But it's also at some point driven by genetics. So, no matter how much, how many vegetables you eat, no matter how many triathlons you run, no matter how thin you are, at some point you reach a sort of a floor below which you can't get in terms of your LDL numbers because you have a genetic blueprint that says, I don't care, knock yourself out. The lowest LDL I'm going to allow, because otherwise I'm going to make more, is I'm just picking a number out of the air, is 120. Okay. The good news is if you eliminate all the other factors that might be driving HMG-CoA reductase and you're just left with the genetic component, even tiny doses of statins can bottom out that number. Some people are very good LDL producers and they respond very well to statins. Okay, make too much. Number two, get rid of too little. We have an elimination pathway that involves bile. So bile is a substance we make in the liver to help digest food. Bile is very cholesterol rich. It's one of the things we use circulating LDL to make. And every single time we eat, we dump a bunch of bile into the digestive system. It's used up and out it goes. So that's one way we get rid of LDL, because we always need to have bile ready for the next meal. So we pull more LDL to make bile for the next meal. Some people are very efficient. Rather than wasting any bile that didn't get used up in the digestive process, they reabsorb it, they put it back, which means they need to pull less LDL from the bloodstream to make bile for the next meal, and their LDL levels stay up. This is where the original cholesterol lowering drugs worked. They were called bile acid resins or bile acid sequestrants, and they literally bound bile in the digestive system and you eliminated through the stool. And it worked. LDL levels dropped. The problem was they were messy powders, or you had to take 8 pills a day. People got digestive upset. So we dropped people's LDL, but it was a pretty miserable experience. So when statins came along, these medications really fell out of favor. But this is where food comes in, because you can use food to help increase bile wasting through increasing fiber intake, because fiber binds bile in the digestive system and helps usher it out, and through plant sterols, which are natural plant components that compete with bile for reabsorption, so you reabsorb less. Okay, make too much, get rid of too little, or don't use enough. The don't use enough goes to LDL receptors. We have little grabbers on our cells that take LDL from the bloodstream and bring that LDL inside our cells to be used for various functions. We need cholesterol. We make hormones, we make cell walls with it. The truth is, we can make most of the LDL or cholesterol that we need inside our cells. We don't actually need a lot of it circulating in our bloodstreams. In fact, levels around 30, remember we were talking about 130, 170, 50, levels around 30 are perfectly safe and actually found in most mammals. So you don't need a lot of circulating LDL for optimal cellular and body function. But if it's circulating around, we'll take it, right? We don't have to make it inside. We'll just grab it. These receptors are influenced by many things. So saturated fats, they reduce how well those receptors work, and LDL levels rise. So that's how saturated fats raise LDL. estrogen helps receptors bloom. So when women go through menopause, that stimulus to grow those LDL receptors goes away, and their cholesterol tends to go up with menopause. There's also an enzyme called PCSK9. The name's not important other than it controls receptor levels, and that's the target for the latest group of cholesterol lowering drugs that you may have seen on TV, Repatha, Praluent, Levquio, like, oh, I don't, that the guy that walks around like, I don't have time to manage my cholesterol. I just get 2 shots a year and my cholesterol's perfect. Well, those are biologics, and they work on that enzyme, and they can drop LDL quite markedly, because when you get rid of PCSK9, these little receptors flourish, and you start bringing LDL back into the cells. So there's 3 major factors, and if you notice, I didn't talk much about cholesterol in food, because there's so many more powerful things at play here.
Some people, and I mentioned this before, my wife included, can't figure out why their cholesterol is so high, especially if they exercise, don't eat that much red meat. What percentage of people have high cholesterol, even though they have good health?
Yes, so familial hypercholesterolemia, so this is purely genetic, very high LDL levels, is actually quite uncommon. It affects about 1 out of 200 people, which means 199 out of 200, their high cholesterol is driven in part by lifestyle factors. But like I mentioned before, you're going to reach kind of genetic bottoms beyond which you cannot influence things anymore. So you're going to reach a genetic bottom of how active your HMG-CoA reductase is, and how much your LDL you make in the liver. You're going to have a specific genetic makeup that determines how well you reabsorb bile. You're going to have some influence through hormones, especially, and also genetics, in terms of PCSK9 activity, in terms of those LDL receptors. So you can have a genetic, not genetic predisposition necessarily to super high cholesterol, but maybe genetic barriers to reducing it to the level that you need it to be at for your particular health situation. And that's where medications and then food interventions can really make a difference.
We've been talking about cholesterol, but another major health threat is high blood sugar. Both obviously are bad, but is one worse than the other?
Well, both are bad. So it's like, which evil do I pick as being worse? If I had to pick one, I would have to say it's blood sugar, because high blood sugar influences a lot of different things, right? High cholesterol is really focused on accumulation of gunk in our arteries, and so it's kind of a one-hit wonder from one evil per risk, whereas blood sugar elevations have wide-ranging effects. Not only do they affect, cholesterol levels, so they're going to affect LDL, they also affect nerves, they also affect kidneys, so and our eyes, so they can interfere with long-term vision, kidney function, can aid atherosclerosis, and predispose people to neuropathy. So I would have to say high blood sugars over the long haul are absolutely the worst of the two.
You mentioned statins earlier in the show. Statins are considered the gold standard for treating high cholesterol, but are they for everybody?
So, I prescribe statins all the time. Yeah, and I started a food company. So we have to put this in perspective. Some people should be on statin medications. So there are 3 main groups where statins have been shown to improve outcomes. And that's why we put people on medications. It's not to make numbers look perfect. It's to help them live longer, better. And if you already have heart or vascular disease, so you've had a heart attack, a stent, bypass surgery, stroke, you should be on a statin, because we know those individuals live longer, better when they're on those medications, frankly, irrespective of their cholesterol levels. Number 2, patients with familial hypercholesterolemia, those individuals with super high LDL that are purely genetically driven, a lifetime exposure to very high LDL levels really accelerates the buildup of gunk in our arteries. Those people should be on statins. We have good data to show that they benefit from that. Diabetics. If you're a diabetic, especially type 2 between the, well, and type 1, but diabetic between the ages of 40 and 70, you should be on a statin. Diabetics, die of heart and vascular disease, not of high blood sugar. It's their number one killer. So again, we want to throw the kitchen sink at them in terms of prevention, and statins make an impact. Okay. Those individuals should be on statins. However, the vast majority of statin prescriptions are handed out just for high cholesterol alone. There are 94 million Americans who are candidates for statin drugs based upon that criteria. Well, that's crazy. I just mentioned that very few people have cholesterol levels that are purely driven by genetics. For most of us, there's a lifestyle contribution. For those of us that don't need to automatically be on a statin, shouldn't we try modifying lifestyle first, and especially food, because food has the greatest ability to impact one of the major drivers of high cholesterol, which is you don't get rid of enough. And your LDL receptors through saturated fats and HMG-CoA reductase through insulin. So we can impact a lot of the cholesterol pathways through the foods we eat. Why don't we try that first?
It's a novel idea, right?
Yeah.
Watch what you eat.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems that the traditional physician response to both high cholesterol and high blood sugar, and a lot of other medical conditions for that matter, is to prescribe a drug regimen. Why do doctors prescribe so many drugs? Or maybe the better question is, why do doctors prescribe medication as a first line of defense?
The truth is, this is what we are taught to do. If I look back on my education from the time I finished high school to the time I hung up my cardiology shingle, it was 14 years of education. 14 years. Of that time, how much was spent on nutrition? Zero. Not 0 years or 0 months or 0 weeks, 0 hours, nothing. I got 0 nutrition education. Now things are changing a little bit. That nutrition is starting to come into medical education, but the current minimum requirement is 25 hours, which is ridiculous. What I treat as a cardiologist is the downstream effects of poor diet, and not to be taught what to do about that. It's educational malpractice, but we're taught to prescribe drugs. This is the vast majority of our education. The guidelines, the guide that sort of determine and tell us what to do, which the idea behind that is very sound, right? We have experts coming together, they analyze all the medical literature and they look at it objectively and they say, okay, based upon the best of our knowledge, this is what we should do for this condition. Okay, that makes sense. You whether you're in Memphis or in Missoula, you want to be sure your doctor is giving you the same advice, right? It should be standardized. It should be of the highest quality. It should be very thoughtful. The problem is those guidelines are heavily weighted towards drug-based interventions, because guess who pays for all the research? It's pharma. Right. So all the clinical trials that are being done, they're being done on Lipitor and Crestor and Rosuvastatin and Repatha and and Leqvio, all these drugs. No one's doing randomized clinical trials on broccoli. It's too expensive. It's too unwieldy. What's a dose of broccoli? Right? It's so it's all drug based. So everything is driving prescribing.
Can heart disease be reversed?
Yes. And so I want to be, a little cautious. It's not like you can undo everything, but from the standpoint of blockage buildup, you can definitely undo it. maybe not from a 90% blockage to a 0, but you can go from a 90 to a 60, which has tremendous implications for how well your body functions and how resilient your cardiovascular system is. So it's a big deal. Now, getting there is not like just snapping your fingers. It's an all-out prevention effort. It means, you are physically active, right? You eat a whole food plant-based diet. All your risk factors are meticulously controlled, including using medications, when appropriate. So it's a really an all-out effort, but absolutely, we have documented reversal of vascular and coronary disease with aggressive risk factor modification.
Doctor, we were talking before the break about the role that doctors and patients play in our health.
Mm-hmm.
What role do big food companies play?
Oh my gosh, this is something I can talk about for hours. I started Step One Foods because what I realized was that the entire food environment is broken. It's broken. People walk into grocery stores that should be safe places and they are minefields. I mean, honestly, we should be able to take any product from any shelf in any aisle, put it into our carts and feel good about it and think like someone's, looked at this and really examined its health effects. Like none of that happens. Any health claims on packaging are just claims. They're in many ways advertising gimmicks. And, the proof is ultimately in the pudding. People aren't going to the grocery store to buy food that, to make them sick. And yet we are in an epidemic of chronic disease that is driven by nutrition. So I think I have to put some of this, at the feet of food companies. We are surrounded by nutrient poor, calorie dense foods that are made to be addictive, that are, have very long shelf lives, are cheap to produce and are advertised constantly. Like what could go wrong? Well, I'll tell you what can go wrong. 875,000 people dying of heart disease every year, a heart attack happening every 40 seconds, right? 94 million Americans needing to be on statins. Like that's the effect of our dysfunctional food system.
I'm still blown away by that number of 875,000 people a year. I mean, 1 million people. That's just unbelievable.
That's a large city. That's a large city every single year. Yep.
So to your point about food companies, as those companies work obviously day and night to give consumers what we crave, the sweets, the salts, all that, what have they come up with? In your mind, what is the perfect food from their standpoint to win over our taste buds and keep them hostage?
Well, if you ask someone, like what would a food company consider to be the perfect food, right? People will come up with, well, it's an apple or it's an egg or, like try to think of things that, nature provides. Like, no, according to the food companies, the perfect food is the Cheeto. It's the Cheeto. And you know why? Because it is bright orange and we are attracted to bright colors instantly. We love bright colors. And the flavor combination of the Cheeto has been consumer tested, up and down. And it's the perfect combination of salt, sugar, and fat to, set off every single dopamine pleasure receptor in our brains. And the crunch, same thing. It's perfect. It's not too crunchy. It's not too soft. It's just right. Again, thousands of people having, participated in consumer, feedback and machines testing crunch. It's not an accident. It is by design. And you know how when you crunch it, like when you bite it, it kind of disappears because it's so fluffy. There is an industry term for that. It's called vanishing caloric density. It is meant to confuse your brain because you just bit something and it kind of disappeared and your brain said like, well, wait, did I eat something? Did I not eat something? By evolutionary sort of design, our brain's supposed to go like, no, I don't think I ate anything. Like that just kind of went away. So, we don't really register how much we've eaten. And you know how you get that orange stuff on your fingers and you lick in between? That ensures that flavor intensity is varying all the time. So we're never bored. So we're attracted to it. It's designed to be maximally pleasurable. We don't think we ate very much. We're never bored of it. Oh, and it costs nothing to produce, like can last on shelves forever, and it's advertised nonstop. I mean, there you go, the perfect food.
It's the Cheeto. It's that simple.
It's the Cheeto. It's the Cheeto.
There's a legal concept called comparative negligence. If we have a car crash because I run a stop sign, but you're driving without your headlights in the dark, a judge might say we're each 50% responsible for those damages. But as you look at the obesity crisis in America, in a hypothetical sense, what's the percentage of comparative negligence that consumers bear, and what's the food industry's share in that blame?
Oof. that's a heavy question, right? To be honest with you, when I started out as, in cardiology as a physician, I didn't have nearly as much compassion for my patients. It's like, well, just don't eat so much. But what I've come to understand is that the game is fixed. I mean, the only way that food companies can continue to make a profit and expand and grow is either they get more people to eat their food, which is happening, right? We're exporting our wonderful eating habits all over the world, or get people to eat more of it. Well, we only have so much, room in our stomachs. So, we just have to kind of keep feeding, keep kind of incenting people to eat this stuff. So I have to say, I now look at food companies as a big part of the problem.
And just as with the physician-patient relationship, don't we have to go back to the question of individual responsibility? No one's forcing us to eat Cheetos.
Yeah, no one's forcing us to eat Cheetos, but the entire construct of our lives has changed. If you go back, 200, 300 years, I mean, our entire existence was focused on food, right? Growing it, preserving it, cooking it, saving it, trading it, right? It was all about food. Fast forward to today, our entire existence is about being on computers and taking our kids to soccer games and all sorts of other activities. Well, there's still only 24 hours in a day. Something had to give, and that was food preparation. We've outsourced it to others because we're busy with other tasks. The problem is we've outsourced it to groups that may not have our best interest at heart. And this is what Step One Foods is trying to change. We are trying to show that you can make foods that are convenient, that are delicious, and that actually build health, and not at an exorbitant price. You can actually, everyone, it's affordable. It is, it's easy to do. You don't have to change your entire life, and it's convenient. You can still go on your computer. You can still take your kids to soccer practice. You're just eating in a way that builds health. And someone had to do this. And I am so puzzled, actually, that it took, a 5'4" barely 110-pound cardiologist in Minnesota to try and start a movement. I mean, people talk about food as medicine. There's a lot of education happening, a lot of awareness, but actually to take the concept and translate into a suite of products, no one's done that. And it's 2023. We've done it, but we're one company.
Doctor, do a lot of people sort of shrug their shoulders at the idea of eating better and taking better care of themselves simply because they think it's just going to be too hard on themselves?
Yeah, a lot of people have this misconception that you have to change everything, right? You have to be a yoga practicing vegan triathlete to even have a hope, of improving your health through lifestyle. And that's not true. One of the things that Step One Foods has proven is that even with tiny changes in what you eat, well, that's where Step One Foods is concentrated, but I would argue the same for exercise, for many different things, weight loss. You can achieve amazing results over the long haul in terms of your health. With Step One, all we ask is that people eat two slightly better things than what they're eating already, and they're same thing. So it's it's a breakfast, and it's just that these foods have been formulated specifically to deliver key nutrients needed to support cardiovascular health. And if you do that, even if you don't start exercising, even if you continue to eat your habitual burger at lunch, the vast majority of people will see significant cholesterol improvements. I mean, LDL reductions that are meaningful in 30 days. Some people even see medication level effects in terms of LDL reduction, like 20, 30, 40% drops, which is crazy. And all you did was eat one little bar and had a different oatmeal for breakfast. Like, it's astonishing what you can achieve. So don't ever think that you need to change everything to have an important and positive health outcome.
You also tell patients to only eat foods that their great grandparents would recognize.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
The best dietary advice I've ever heard is 7 words long, right? We get all this competing stuff: eat meat, don't eat meat, eat eggs, grapefruit. Oh my God, don't eat grapefruit. 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And what I mean by eat food, that's getting back to what your great grandparents ate. So food, real food that is recognizable, that's 1 ingredient or 2 ingredients, or all the ingredients they are familiar. Not too much, don't stuff yourself, mostly plants. Eat primarily from the vegetarian end of the spectrum. So beans, lentils, leafy greens, fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts and seeds in their most whole and unprocessed forms. Like, that's it. You want to eat some meat? Okay, but eat food, not too much, mostly plants. You want to have some eggs? Great. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Like, anything fits. You want to have a chocolate bar? Great. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. It applies to anything and to any condition, and regardless of what health outcome you are trying to achieve, whether that's to reduce your risk of heart disease, whether it's to reduce your risk of dementia, whether it's to reduce your risk of cancer, eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
We talked about big pharma. We've talked about the food companies. Do you think insurers will ever cover food if they cover medicine? And if so, what will it take to get there?
Well, this is my goal. So, I've got my little baton, and I'm marching, and I'm hoping to be leading a movement, because if insurers will pay for drugs that treat high cholesterol, why wouldn't they pay for food that prevents the cholesterol from being high in the first place? It just makes sense. And some of the medications that we talked about, those PCSK9 inhibitors at the very beginning, these injectables, these are super expensive drugs. They cost $5,000 to $6,000 a year, and all they do is lower your cholesterol. Well, $5,000 to $6,000 a year, that buys a lot of food. And food not only lowers cholesterol, it also improves your blood pressure, improves your blood sugar control, helps you attain a healthy weight. Food is the comprehensive solution to a complex problem. And it should be something that insurers not only are interested in, but actively promote.
Obviously, we're going to live a lot longer if we avoid a fatal heart attack, but you believe there are also 4 pillars of healthy longevity. What are those?
Yeah, I talk about this with my patients all the time because they are so vital. There are communities around the globe where people experience exceptional healthy longevity. And if you look at them as a group, the common threads are that they exercise, they move their bodies every single day, The good news is they're not Kenyan marathoners or Ironman triathletes. It's not about extreme activity, but it is about moving your body through space every single day. I would say at least an hour to an hour and a half of aerobic physical activity. It can be divided, it doesn't have to happen all at once, but move your body every day. Social interconnectedness. These people have a tribe, they belong to a group, they have a social support system. And it's not about he who has the most friends wins, it's about meaningful human connections. We are social animals. We thrive when we have the opportunity to give and receive love. This took a huge hit during COVID. We need to get that back. Number 3, these people are happy. They found joy and purpose in their lives. They have a reason to get up in the morning. And again, they're not doing outlandish things. They're not all building for houses for humanity, but they're doing things that give them a reason to be excited about being alive. And so if they like to garden, well, they have a garden. If they like to learn, they read. If they like to work, they keep working. And the last is, what is it that they eat? They eat a whole food, plant-based diet. And it's back to what I said earlier: beans, greens, fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts and seeds, all in their most whole and unprocessed forms. That is the foundation of their diet. Some are vegetarian, some are vegan, most consume some meat, some fish, some dairy. It's just way less. Fruits, vegetables, grains, plant-based foods, comprise the vast majority of their nutritional intake. And that's it. And what did I say that's so brilliant? Actually, nothing, right? Move your body, have some friends, be happy, eat well. There you go.
That can fit in a bumper sticker. As long as we're talking about groups of 4, you also tell your older patients that there are 4 heart-healthy food groups that should dominate their diets. I suspect they're different than the 4 food groups we often heard growing up: carbohydrates, meat, dairy, and fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, so there are 4 very specific nutrients that are essential for cardiovascular health and prevention of cardiovascular events. The first is fiber, and we talked about that, in the context of cholesterol, but fiber helps bind cholesterol in the digestive system and eliminate it from the body. It also helps build a healthy gut microbiome, which has a whole bunch of other positive health effects. Omega-3 fatty acids. These are healthy fats that come from nuts and seeds and oils and fish and avocados. These unsaturated fats are anti-inflammatory. They help raise good cholesterol, lower triglycerides, and typically lower LDL as well. They're also anti-inflammatory. Antioxidants, these are free radical fighting powerhouses that are found in fruits and vegetables, grains, plant-based foods. And for LDL, for example, the bad cholesterol, to exert its effect, it has to be oxidized. Well, antioxidants prevent oxidization, kind of rusting of our insides. So the more antioxidants we consume, the healthier our insides will be. And finally is plant sterols, which are these natural plant components, actually the plant version of cholesterol, but they work in our digestive system to block cholesterol reabsorption and absorption, and they help reduce LDL. So those are the 4 main building blocks of heart health, and those are the building blocks around which Step 1 Foods were formulated to make sure people received clinically meaningful amounts of these nutrients in just a couple of snacks a day.
Are there also mental health implications that go along with feeding ourselves the right foods?
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And it's very interesting. I think we are just at the tipping point of a lot of this research, and it's related to the gut microbiome. I mean, the very first thing that our foods encounter, right, are a bunch of bacteria in the digestive tract. So that bacteria kind of helps sort what goes in, what effect it has. And it turns out the gut microbiome has a direct link to the brain. I mean, it sends out signals and hormones and messengers to the brain that will determine mood, that will determine satiety, all sorts of different things. So what we eat has a huge effect on mood. And what's interesting, actually, one of the, and look, I'm a cardiologist. I formulated these foods for patients, trying to prevent heart disease and lower their cholesterol. But what's fascinating to me is as they've, gone out into the universe and more people are using them, we get more and more feedback from customers saying like, did you put an antidepressant in here? Because I feel a lot better. And I think part of it is the good fats, actually. I think a lot of people don't get enough of the really good, healthy omega-3 fatty acids. And, and those are highly prevalent in our food. So absolutely, what we eat has a huge impact on emotional health and our mood.
And I'll stick with that for one more question. And I know that you're not a clinical psychologist, but how does a heart attack affect someone's mental health? I would think it would affect uncertainty about their mortality, maybe lead to depression or anxiety. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you are right on. A heart attack, often comes out of the blue. Half of all heart attacks happen without any warning. So it's the very first time you have a clue that you have a problem, and it's dramatic, and it is your first true brush with mortality. And it is very common actually for people to suffer depression and anxiety as a result. I mean, it's scary, and it changes your whole, you were one person, at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., you had your heart attack. You're a completely different person, a week later as you're leaving the hospital. It's and now you're on all these medications, right? Some of them, frankly, that impact mood, some of them that make you feel bad, like statins can make you achy, right? Like and so everything has changed. And now you have a disease that you didn't even know you had before. So it can have a huge mental health and emotional impact. Absolutely. Very common.
We have just about 2 minutes left. Your book, Slay the Giant, The Power of Prevention in Defeating Heart Disease, was first released in 2008. That was a long time ago, almost 15 years now.
Yeah.
I know advice can become obsolete based on new information. Is the information in Slay the Giant still applicable in today's world?
Here's the irony. The information in that book is primarily around lifestyle. It's not about doses of drugs or anything like that. And it turns out, good advice remains good advice. It is just as applicable today as it was then. My greatest, not regret, but like a bit of sorrow that I have is that nothing's changed. Right? We're still not exercising as much as we should. We're smoking less, so that's good. But the rates of high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess weight, these things that the book talks about and helps people overcome, they've gotten worse, more prevalent, and rather than better. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have control over our health destinies, and we should use that control, because medications are an incomplete solution. They are just pretty wallpaper that we put up over crumbling walls, and everything looks great, but we haven't fixed the underlying structure. The way we live is how to fix the walls, how to reinforce that structure so it never comes down.
Dr. Elizabeth Klodas, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me today, Chris. Lovely to be with you.
And thank you to our audience for joining us for another episode of Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.